Hey Hunters, Lord here, back with another Monster Hunter Wilds video. In today's video, I want to talk about weapon balancing for Monster Hunter Wilds. Now, I've already made a video going over the relative weapon strength from the open beta test. If you haven't seen that, I'll leave a link down in the description. However, in this video, I wanted to talk about the changes that I would make to some of the weapons to better balance them, whether that's buffing them up or making them slightly less OP, you get the idea. Before we start, I just want to let you know, of course, these are my opinions, so feel free to let me know in the comments down below what changes you would make to your favorite weapon before Monster Hunter Wilds releases next month. Let's go ahead and get straight into it. Okay, so first of all, let's again take a quick look back at the relative weapon strength chart that we made after the open beta test. Again, if you want to see the full breakdown on that, you can check out the videos linked in the description below. As you guys can see here, there's a pretty hefty gap that starts to appear around 11th place on this list, especially by way of times, with Hunting Horn running around 22 seconds faster than dual blades. Now we know that dual blades are going to jump up on this list upon release once we get access to elemental weapons and elemental skills, as well as some stamina management. So personally, I don't think that dual blades are going to need any help on release. However, all the weapons that fall below dual blades on this list, I think really are going to need some help. So let's first talk about how I would buff them in order to tie them more in line with the higher tier weapons, hopefully taking this gap from around 46% down to 25% or less. Firstly, let's go ahead and get the bowgun talk out of the way. Heavy bowgun and light bowgun are absolutely woeful on this list. That's due to two main factors. The first being that we didn't have any recoil or reload skills to help with the atrocious recoil and slow reloads on most of the good ammos like spread and slicing. I think that will be immediately remedied upon release. So we can talk about part 2, where we had some pretty bad clip sizes for ammos, so you had to reload a lot more often. Again, I fully expect this to become a non-issue once we get access to more than one of each bowgun type, so I'd leave bowguns as they are for now, no buffs and no nerfs. Next up, we have the Lance, which is tragically behind all other melee weapons at nearly 3/4 of a minute behind Switch Axe. Now this is pretty bad, and Lance already has struggled enough in the popularity contests of previous titles, so something needs to be done here. Offensive Guard making a return in Wilds would be a great start, allowing for an additional 15% damage, which would take Lance from here to around the 5 minute and 50 second mark, putting it right around Sword and Shield on this list. However, as you can see, Sword and Shield is still falling almost 50 seconds behind Hunting Horn, so I don't think that that's going to cut it, and that gap is going to remain even with the addition of Offensive Guard. Further buffs that I would make to Lance are just an overall motion value buff to make the attacks hit harder. That's really the only thing that makes much sense to me right now as far as damage goes. I think for now the counter thrust is pretty strong, but I'd honestly like to see it be stronger. I want that to be a super satisfying payoff. Give me damage numbers like a greatsword. Maybe not TCS levels of damage, but I'd like to see that become one of the highest damaging single attacks in the game. Reward our Lance bros for skillfully using the counters to turn their defense into offense by giving them some juicy damage. I also thought of maybe adding a skill sort of akin to Counter-Strike from Monster Hunter Rise, but for guarding. So you'd get a smaller buff than you'd get for Offensive Guard, like an additive buff. Whereas Offensive Guard needs a perfect guard, you would just get like a plus 10 or 20 for any guard. However, the issue I see arising there is that Gun Lance, Heavy Bowgun, and Charge Blade would also gain a benefit from this, and they're all already likely going to be top 5 weapons in Monster Hunter Wilds, so I think that adding a buff to them, again, will not help Lance close that massive gap we're seeing there. Another thing we could look at, if the team isn't willing to buff Lance's damage to make it as good as the other weapons, is to look at its team play by taking a page from Monster Hunter Frontier, where you could block teammates from getting hit with a skill called Team Guard. This, at its base in Frontier, would be a bit too strong, so I'd say you just add a skill, you can call it Team Guard again or whatever you want, but make it work more like a divine blessing for your team. If a single monster attack hits multiple hunters, but a Lance main guarded that attack, allow the teammates that took damage from that same attack to take up to a certain % less damage from that attack. Think of it as the Lance shield taking the brunt of the attack, so the follow-through attack doesn't hit your teammates as hard. I think this would be a great buff for Lance. I'm sure many Lance mains would like it, some wouldn't. It's surely not enough, but I could see that being great for some of the endgame or final boss farming for Wilds. Like, imagine being able to reduce the damage your team takes during the Iceborne Fatalis fight. I'm sure as Lance mains you've run into this, where you join a Fatalis hunt, you're blocking everything, you're dealing your damage, and your teammates cart anyway. This could help reduce some of that annoyance without being totally necessary for optimal Lance damage, but again, that's just a thought and doesn't quite reach the core of the problem. So let's give Lance some freaking damage buffs, baby. Now we already know that Switch Axe is going to be getting some buffs, of course with the most recent community update before Christmas. They're making the axe play transition to sword mode a little bit more satisfying, and the overall moveset is supposedly being buffed. However, I feel like Switch Axe needs more reason to be in sword mode. For now, the only real reason to go into sword mode was to just spam a full release slash, which was so much better for damage that it was fully worth losing sword mode and going back to axe mode by using full release slash than it was to stay in sword mode and just use regular sword attacks. That needs to change. You need to make the file stronger, give it better elemental synergy, or just buff motion values all around. The most annoying part of Switch Axe in the Wilds open beta test was having to hit axe attacks on the monster to build sword gauge. For me, a change that I'd like to see in the full game is something like rapid morph returning, but give it a little extra buff to Switch Axe where the gauge will automatically regenerate over time, or it'll regenerate more gauge if you have that skill per hit, so that way you can get to sword mode more consistently. The overall feel of Switch Axe is not what it should have been, and I think just a little change like that would make it feel wild. Up next we have Sword and Shield. Nearly half a minute behind non-elemental dual blades is not where you want to see this weapon, so let's go ahead and buff it. So like we've talked about before, offensive guard could help, but I feel like most hunters don't use the Sword and Shield for its guarding prowess, as that typically tends to be more of an afterthought, and the only real synergy we've seen with offensive guard and Sword and Shield was Metsu spam in Sunbreak. Now they've already made some changes to the moveset, allowing more attacks to be used while guarding, increasing overall weapon responsiveness, and making both the backstep and sliding swipe moves cover more distance, but personally, it just needs to be better. Sword and Shield tends to be very spammy around a single combo, whether that's the perfect rush using Frostcraft in Iceborne, using Metsu or your infinite combos in Sunbreak, or the new Charge Chop combo here in Monster Hunter Wilds. With so many different options for Sword and Shield combos and ways to link them together, I'd like to see them all be viable. Of course, you could maybe have one be the best just for the sake of having your quote god combo or what have you, but I'd say you could do something like buffing shield bashes to deal more stun, you could increase the power of just general normal attacks, give us a reason to use the falling bashes again, etc, etc. This weapon overall just needs more oomph. It's an all-time Monster Hunter classic, and it's time Capcom shows it the love that it deserves. Now we know that Hunting Horn is getting some small changes. Of course, the melody effects to your teammates are being reduced a little bit, but the melody buffs to yourself are being increased. As well as, when you swap from Hunting Horn to another weapon on your secret, the buffs won't last as long. Overall, I think these are some pretty good changes. I felt like the echo bubbles were in a pretty good spot. The damage seems to be right for what they are, so no changes there. The damage of Hunting Horn has always been a little lower to account for the stronger buffs that they get, like attack up large and extra large. So I think that once we get access to the full song list, Hunting Horn will be in a pretty good spot. It's only 27% behind Bow right now, and if you remove the outliers of Bow and Charge Blade, it's within 10% of Longsword, which seems to be a solid spot to find itself in going into release. So overall, I really don't think Hunting Horn needs anything else right now. Insight Glaive has also gotten some pre-release changes, including the return of a better aerial vaulting ability, so helicoptering is back, which is just a godsend for my Insight Glaive mains. However, I feel like IG's moveset and button combos seem to get more and more convoluted with each Monster Hunter title that I play. I pretty much entirely avoided playing Insight Glaive and Rise and Sunbreak because there's just too many damn buttons to press. I feel like I had to do a freaking Mortal Kombat or like Street Fighter style like finisher combo just to do one attack for Insect Glaive. And Wilds, I don't think has done much to alleviate that issue. I don't know if my Insect Glaive mains agree. Again, let me know down in the comments. The weapon plays great and is super strong, but I do feel like I constantly have to glance up at the input guide at the top corner in order to make sure I know what attack I just pressed. I think giving the attacks maybe a more defined look for your hunter would help greatly, and maybe this is just a skill issue on my part because I suck, but I struggled to tell just from looking at my hunter what move I had actually pressed sometimes during the beta. Now, of course, like I said, Insect Glaive is very strong, but it feels like it's just getting to be a little too much at times. For Hammer and Greatsword, there's not anything I feel I'd change for these ones. The addition of more hit stop was already announced, and it will definitely help these two weapons especially feel big and meaty like they should, so no additional notes there. Now, Gunlance is nuts. If you've not been keeping up with TSC's runs, you should be. That dude has this weapon finely tuned. It might genuinely be a top 2 weapon in the full game next month. I mean, it is ridiculous. With the additions of offensive guard and artillery, I mean, Jesus, dude, it gives me freaking goosebumps to think of how good Gunlance is going to be. However, instead of nerfing this or something like that, I want to take this as an example of taking a weapon that's been statistically low on the power curve and popularity charts, and then giving it the juice it needed to be competitive with the typical top dogs of the Monster Hunter weapons. This treatment needs to be branched out to these lower tier weapons that we see here: Lance, Switch Axe, Sword and Shield. Again, like I said at the beginning of this video, I want this gap to close up significantly, and so giving the Gunlance treatment to those other weapons will surely do that. Of course, I'm not a game designer, and I think that my changes that I offered up earlier are pretty good, but again, if you have any other ideas, let me know in the comments down below. Finally, for our top 3 weapons, Longsword, Chargeblade, and Bow, I don't really see any extra changes being needed. We already know that Bow is being tuned down a little bit with its focus strike time being increased quite a bit, and the normal shots also being buffed to help coerce hunters into using them more, rather than just spamming your arc shots into focus strikes or your tracer arrows. This overall though gives me a lot of hope for Monster Hunter Wild's overall weapon balancing, as I think that this is a good design philosophy. Rather than nerfing the shit out of the good stuff, take the weaker attacks and bring them up to make them good. Nerfing the good and fun things in PvE games has always been a terrible thing for developers for their community, so I'm happy that they're taking the approach of making the bad good rather than making the good bad. So once again, I'll ask you guys, what are your thoughts on my changes? What changes would you make to buff or tune your favorite weapon or any of the other weapons? Let me know in the comments down below. With all that being said, thank you guys so much for watching today's video. Do leave a like if you agreed with my changes or if you just enjoyed the video, as it helps me out with the algorithm. If you're new to my channel, new to Monster Hunter, or you want to see more videos like this, definitely be sure to subscribe. Again, Monster Hunter Wilds is dropping next month, and this channel is going to be a great spot to find brand new builds, guides, tutorials, and so much more, and the best way to make sure you don't miss out on that is to be subscribed. Thank you all again for watching today's video. I wish you all a good day, a happy new year, and happy hunting.